Hello, YouTube friends. I'm Heidi, and I am excited for today's project. But before we get into that, I just wanted to say thank you to all my subscribers and also a big shout out to my new subscribers. There's been a big jump in my numbers recently, so there's a lot of you who are new to this journey that I am on, and I just want to say welcome. Today I'm going to be taking canvas and my Inktense blocks and creating a fabric that I'm going to use to make a journal cover. And without any further ado, let's get started on this. I'll see you on the other side. First thing you want to do before starting the cover is to measure the book that you're going to cover. And so take the height, and to that height, you want to add 3/4 of an inch. And the reason for that is because we're adding 1/4 inch seam allowance, top and bottom, plus 1/8 of an inch top and bottom for ease and top stitching. So that's 3/4 of an inch. So whatever your height is, add 3/4 of an inch to that. Then take your tape measure and lay it down on the surface. Go all the way edge to edge around the book, and then that will give you how much fabric you need to go all the way around. Now to that measurement, you also want to add the same 3/4 of an inch. For the book flap, inside book flap, you want to measure however far in you want to come. I'm going to do 3 inches on mine. Now for that one, because of the seam allowance, the ease top stitching, I'm adding 5/8 of an inch on this one. The height of the book flap will be the same as you did for the exterior of the book flap. Once you have all your measurements figured out, for the cover dimensions, you will cut 1 of the main fabric, 1 of lining, and 1 of interfacing. Of the flap dimensions, you will cut 2 of the main fabric, 2 of the lining fabric, and 2 of the interfacing. For the main fabric of my journal, I'm going to be using canvas, and because I'm going to be doing quite a bit of stitching on the cover part, I actually cut it 1 inch larger, just so that I can cut it to size after I'm done with all the stitching and everything. I want to make sure that it doesn't end up too short. My 2 flat pieces, I did cut to size, but I'm going to go ahead now and choose my Inktense Blocks colors, and I'll be coloring this with them and activating it with water and getting them all painted ready for our design. I'm going to be doing a gradation of colors, and I've chosen my colors here, and I will be using them in that order from top to bottom. I will also be coloring in the flaps of the book cover as well, using the same gradation. So I'm not going to really be doing a tutorial on that. I'll just give you little snippets of me working with that and how I'm making that work. whenever I'm going to do any amount of stitching, and this I'm going to be doing quite a bit, I like to have quilt batting behind my piece, and it gives a little bit more depth to it. But what I've done here, because I want to paint my piece edge to edge, I've taken my batting, it's larger than my cut piece, and I've taped it to my table, and then I'll just lay this right on top of that, and I'll be able to paint on here without this moving around on me. So I'm going to go ahead and take some water and start activating the color now. Fabric has dried, and I have it on the quilt batting, and what I want to do is actually sew some wavy lines back and forth all over this whole thing. I don't want to switch colors of my thread. I want to stick with one particular color. I found in my stash of thread this Coats and Clark. It's a variegated thread. Anyway, I think this comes across well on all the colors. So I'm going to go ahead and thread this in and start stitching. I have a 9014 needle on my machine, and I have an all-purpose thread on my bobbin. Just going to bring up the bobbin thread. And I'm just using white. You want to make sure you adjust your tension whenever you're doing this, so that you don't see the knots from the top side. And if you've never done free motion quilting or stitching before, I suggest that you go and see one of my previous videos. I'll give you a link up above on the top of the screen there, and you can go back and look at the different instructions that I have for doing that. I have taken my machine out of free motion mode and switched it back to normal sewing. And so now what I'm going to be doing is just using different threads and different stitches, just adding variation of decorative stitches and color just randomly throughout the piece just to make it visually interesting. I have the decorative stitching done, and just so you know, I did not do any of this decorative stitching on the flaps that go inside the journal. Yeah, you're not going to see them, so I'm not going to waste my thread and time doing that part. One of the things I want to just mention, I did do kind of the wavy lines like I did this with the straight stitching, but I also I did some cross, pieces, just add some visual interest, and don't want everything to look exactly the same. I think it looks cool. And I'm going to go ahead and take this to the next step and work on the actual focal part of the book cover. And I'll come back. I've cut a piece of cheesecloth. It's like only like 2 layers of it. So I want to see the colors from underneath coming through. And yes, I realize that some of my stitching is being covered. That's okay. I knew that was going to happen. I want it to be more organic and freeform. And this will all get stitched down. And let's see here. So I'm kind of liking that. So what I've done as well is I've chosen 3 colors that are actually in this piece to be my focal that it's going to be right across the top of this cheesecloth. And I'm trying to decide, do I want to do leaves? Do I want to leave them as squares? I'm kind of thinking, some sort of configuration like that. I'll do stitching on those as well. And I'm going to be doing some free motion stitching all along this piece. It's just a matter of deciding what I want to do exactly with those. And I think what I'll end up doing, because this is what my original idea was, is taking my square and folding it in half into a triangle, taking my scissors and then cutting a leaf shape, kind of like a teardrop shape, kind of like the way when you've made hearts when you were a kid. I don't necessarily want my leaves to be symmetrical, but generally about the same size. So I got that folded in half, and I kind of want this nice flat-ish bottom to it. And then I'll curve it around and then come to a point and get a leaf shape out of that. Yeah, I'm liking that. So that'll get placed on there along with the others. I'll go ahead and cut the rest of them and then arrange that. Now, what would have been the smarter thing to do, because I wanted to use heat and bond, would have been to put the squares on the heat and bond and then cut my leaf shape out. But I didn't do that because I was just eager to see how I liked the leaf shape, doing it that way. But I can still put the heat and bond on there. I just have to cut out around the leaf, and that's okay. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, and then I'll bond that to what I have there. Think of it this time, but I like the distortion. I like the holes and the very organic feel of it like this. And from there, get that figured out just exactly where I want my leaves. I'm going to start with the blue one way over here on this side. And this one we'll put right here. Push that down. And then the yellow one is actually going to overlap those a little bit, and I'm totally cool with that. I am going to press these on and make sure I don't want to make any adjustments first before I do that. And then I'm going to set my machine back to free motion quilting, and we'll go from there. So I've put my free motion foot back on. What I'm doing now is I'm doing a pebbling stitch on the cheesecloth. It can be a little bit fiddly just because I do have a lot of, you know, edges sticking up, and sometimes I have to just coax it down and whatever, but it's going to look really pretty cool. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, and I'll go all the way around all the cheesecloth and carefully go around the leaves, not on the leaves. I have the cheesecloth all stitched on now, and what I've decided to do is pick a matching thread to each of the leaves, and then for each of the leaves I'm also going to do a different stitch pattern on there. I'm going to start with the gold one here. I put my gold thread back in because I forgot to do the stem of the leaf, so I'm going to go ahead and do that now. It's time to trim the cover to the dimensions of my panels. And one of the things I want to make sure of is that, I want to make sure that the leaves are on that page. I'm going to add on 1/4 of an inch there. That way when I do my seam allowance, I won't be taking the leaf off. All right, so it's time to get the lining assembled with the flaps. I'll go ahead and do that now. I do have some color matching that I'm trying to do with my flaps and the main panel in the front. And so I have that arranged the way I want, and this is how the flaps are going to come in. So with that knowledge, this is the edge, the inside edge is the one that I want to sew my lining to. So I'm going to put my lining upside down on that flap. So 1/4 of an inch on this inside seam, just on the seam, leaving all the rest of the edges open. I've stitched the flap panels together with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. I turned and pressed them. And now on the stitched edge, I'm going to do a top stitch 1/8 of an inch away from the sewn edge. And I'm going to be using a 3.0 stitch length versus the 2.5 that I use for the construction of this. All right, for the assembly, I'm going to take my main cover panel face up, and then next I'm going to be taking my flaps, which you can tell that they don't match that way. I gotta put them the right direction. There, like that. And I want the edges that are sewn together to the inside, the raw edges on the outside. I'm going to match up all my raw edges. And then after that, I'm going to take my lining panel and I'm going to lay that face down on top. Now, because of the thickness of the main fabric panels, instead of leaving the opening on the flap edge, I'm actually going to do it on the bottom edge down here, the 3 to 4 inches down there, because it's thinner. It'll be easier to sew that together once I turn it. So I'm going to go ahead and do the 1/4 inch seam allowance all the way around, back tacking at each edge of the opening. Your journal cover. Just wanted to point out that it's important that you sew down over the edges of the flaps, just so that that's anchored in really well. I went ahead and trimmed all my corners, and I'm going to go ahead and turn it now. But first, before I do that, I'm actually going to take it to the iron. I'm going to press my seams on each side up the 1/4 inch, and then turn it over and do the same on this side. And that way it'll be easier to have that crease in there after it's turned. Okay, I had my piece turned. I gave it a really good pressing. I used a lot of steam, and especially with this canvas, it's very thick. So you're going to need, if you use canvas, you can use muslin or whatever it is you want to use, but if you use canvas, it's going to take a lot of steam just to get it to lay down pretty flat. So what I'm going to go ahead and do, I've got my opening clipped closed, and I'm going to take this to the machine now and do 1/8 of an inch top stitch all the way around, making sure to close up the opening right there. All right, I have all the top stitching done around the journal. Now, I have a lot of bulk. Probably should have added in another 1/8 of an inch or so. But when it's too small, and if it's too tight to get your book in, which it is just the tiniest little bit, it's an easy solution. All you need to do, if you have a rotary cutter that's for paper, or even just use your scissors or an X-Acto knife. All you have to do is just take a little bit off to get it in there. And if you need to, you can round those corners. You don't need to do very much. You don't have to trim all the way up in here, because this doesn't even go inside the cover. Just trim enough to fit inside the cover, the flaps. And I did make my corners rounded, so I wanted to re-round those corners. And then once you've trimmed it, snug fit, and then you can get your other side in and trim that as well. But that is the cover. I will zoom out once I get that other side done. Well, there you go. It's all finished up. And obviously, if you're going to be covering a hardcover book, you won't be able to trim the cover like you can a composition or paper cover book. So be sure that you add enough ease in addition to the allowances for the seams and the top stitching. There you go. It's all finished, and I hope you enjoyed that. This was more about, I hope you all are staying happy and healthy. And until next time, have a great one. Bye for now.